Welcome back to What Do You Know with Nick and Devin. I'm Nick.
I'm Devin.
Hey, Dev, how are you?
Hey, doing great.
Yeah.
January's finally fucking over.
Finally. Christ, it has felt like months and months and months in one.
Yeah, I'm glad it wasn't just me. Like, I've seen so many TikToks and memes about just how long January has been. Like, oh, here's January 32nd.
I know, there's like some solidarity in that. Yeah. Totally. Well, we have gotten so much news in like a 2-week time frame.
I think that's it. Where it's just been so much over and over and over again.
Well, I saw a chart that was like, we've gotten 100 days worth of typical like first 100 days of news within like a 5-day period.
That would do it.
I'm in work meetings and I'm getting CNN updates that are affecting my job. That I'm just like, hey, everyone, did we know about this yet? And my leadership is like, what's going on? And then I'm like,
incredible.
Like, I can't get information like this from CNN and not like who we're working with as a client.
Right. Well, it's not like they're telling anybody what they're about to do.
Truly.
It's very reminiscent of 2020 and the pandemic, but like worse.
But way worse. Yeah. It's a little bit, it's one of those things where I think about it and I'm like, are we just trying to like flood the system? Because then if you flood the system, you overwhelm people and people will either riot, right, and get upset, or be so consumed and overwhelmed that you kind of have this like complacency of sorts. And I'm wondering if that's like the tactic.
Which way we'll go.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I hope that like we can like fight fascism, but like it's a pretty big country, you know?
And you know, there are people that are like, fascism, that's not that bad.
Right. I'm like, Christ.
Right.
Well, someone was like, I did think it was funny. I saw one political cartoon that was like Dems throwing an egg at like Trump as like a Superman and like him like with, you know, his agenda underneath him.
Sure.
And I'm like, that is literally all we're doing right now. We're like, what about egg prices? And I'm like, okay, and I get it. It's like a bit, appreciate the bit, but we've gone too far with the bit. Can we start doing things now? Right. Yeah. Like I understand. Right.
Get it. Get your own chicken.
Right. Get your own chicken. Get your own little coop.
Right. Watch out for bird flu.
Watch out. Well, yeah, exactly. All right. Well, today, I'm just going to let the people know.
Yeah.
A little bit longer of an episode.
Okay.
But there might be like I'm going to break it up a little bit. So maybe I'll be like, hey, go get a little water break. Yeah. You know what I mean? Maybe get a little snacky.
Take a longer drive. Take the scenic route.
Do a couple loops around the block. Yeah. You know what I mean? I get you. So a little bit of like a heads up around there. But it is, I feel very topical and something that I think that like is important to not only discuss, but to understand and be able to kind of like put out into the world and have discussion with, especially right now.
Yeah, cool.
So I just want to give the people a little bit of a warning, if you will. Not a warning, just a heads up. Yeah. Not a warning. This is not bad.
A polite heads up.
Yeah. Like the way you repeated what I said. But just a little different.
Well, it's not necessarily a warning, you know.
Yeah,
it's just
that's
heads
fair.
up.
Well, so Dev, let me ask you. I'm not going to ask you the God damn it. I'm not going to ask you the titular question yet.
Sure.
I did remember this time, but I'm not going to ask it. I'm not going to ask you. My question is, have you ever felt like discriminated against? Have you ever been in a situation where you have felt to be like a minority or like just not, I guess like oppressed or discriminated or etc.?
Yeah. As a white man, not in that sense.
Sure.
But so like nothing for my race, how I look.
Sure.
Even from a religious standpoint, like I was raised Catholic. Had to think about that. So like I wasn't even oppressed there.
Yeah.
But I think definitely from kind of like a class issue, I would say.
Yeah.
I grew up in certainly better off than some people.
Sure.
But I'm not as well off as most.
Yeah.
And I felt that every now and then, like especially like as we grew up, and like I'm sure you also probably experienced this as well.
Yeah.
Growing up, going to high school and whatnot, and seeing how the kids on the other side of the tracks lived.
Yeah.
You know, like they have these massive houses, massive yards. They weren't really wanting for things, had opportunities and whatnot, where I was like, oh, like that's like in certain conversations, they were with people that weren't my friends. They were like, oh, like, don't you have this? Or like, weren't you able to do this? Like, oh, we went skiing in the mountains this winter. What did you do? I was like, well, I shoveled my house out. Like,
of those snowstorm. Yeah.
Like we didn't have people that would shovel our house out for us, kind of situation. So I think it was just like more of a class issue of discrimination rather than what most people are feeling now of a racial discrimination.
Totally. And I think to that point, like, yeah, I agree with you. I think there were some like growing up class aspects of things. I think my family being Mexican, there's a lot of things rooted in that as well. It's like we're, of course, fair skinned when it comes to being Hispanic, but just like trying to assimilate and things of that nature, being gay, etc. It's a downer sometimes.
You just had to be all those things.
Had to be gay. But yeah, I totally get that. And I think what's interesting is that, to your point, like there is a lot of attention spoken to kind of course, like racial aspects of like diversity and racial aspects, of course, of discrimination. Yeah. But I think that's the most like prominent because that's the most things that you can see outright, right?
Yeah. And then like also since I'm a straight man as well, like I haven't faced any of the sexuality issues of people calling you out, especially the like trans folk and other members of the LGBT community right now are facing. I didn't see any of that either. I mean, I saw it happening to others, but not to myself necessarily.
And I think this is the thing is that well, let me ask you the titular question, and then we can get into a little bit more. So, Devin, what do you know about DEI?
Well, I know that it causes plane crashes. Jesus, too soon.
That pesky little thing, and aviation.
I wanted to bite my tongue as I was saying it, but I just couldn't. I was talking.
It's fine.
I know that it stands for diversity. Equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
And I know that it is a very important thing to recognize.
Totally.
But here we are in this country at the moment. I don't necessarily know like when it started, especially like, when you're applying for a job and whatnot, like filling out your DEI form. Like I think it's like I forget the exact acronym, but I think it's like a EOE form or something that. Where you have to say like, I'm not a protected veteran. That's always in caps for some reason. Like every veteran. Every veteran's just constantly yelling. You have to say if you're disabled or have a disability, and then you have to like say your race and whatnot. Sometimes there's sexuality on there. But yeah, I don't know when that necessarily started, but those I'm gonna stop myself from here because I think that's all I like solid now.
Totally. Well, and I think this is the big reason why I wanted to bring it up is because I think there was a lot of discussion around what people think it is and like where it because of where it kind of started, it kind of morphed into this like preferential treatment aspect of things and like, okay, now it's like reverse racism and like all of these things, right?
All that bullshit.
Right. And so I kind of wanted to talk to it to not only give its history, right? And like what it is and how it's been utilized, but also how robust and like how many people this really does help. And while race is an aspect of DEI, of course, there are so many other facets that are included that I just don't think people realize because it's not the talking point, right? Like it's not the thing to rally a group of people, but I just want people to understand that like you start taking away aspects of this, like you yourself are going to be affected, right? Across the board, unless you're like a 1%er, like this will affect, like, I just don't think people get that. And I think there's a lot of educational issues in the country and there's a lot of like easily kind of manipulated and like propaganda of things, etc. And, that's a topic for another day.
Right. Well, I mean, like to your point, like people were calling during the election season, people are calling Kamala Harris a DEI hire, and like people really focus on the racial aspect of DEI. But then once all of the DEI stuff was taken away this past month by himself, I mean, all of the veterans were finally realized, like, oh shit, it's not just my Hispanic neighbor that I hate for no reason other than the color of their skin. It's me, someone who served for our country, is also getting fucked over by all of this.
100%. 100%.
That's why in all caps it says if you are a disabled veteran or not.
Right. You're like, read your fucking form. Yeah. So I think
it's in all caps for you.
So today what I want to do is really, of course, we're going to define DEI.
Yeah.
We're going to go through a lot of like moments in history.
Sure.
So we're going to go from the beginning of like kind of where its roots kind of started all the way through today. And we're just going to hit major milestones.
Yeah.
We're going to dive into some of them, but not all of them. And when I say dive, I don't really mean like fully. Like some of these can be full topics in and of themselves.
Definitely.
But I want to make sure that we're hitting the key points. And then we'll talk about how in certain sectors, DEI has really improved the lives of the American people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So here we go, kids.
Strap in.
Yes. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is, and typing this, I kept on typing diversity and not diversity because it's like right down the street from me. And I'm just like, oh, Christ. Okay. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, organizational frameworks which seek to promote the fair treatment and full participation of all people, in particular groups who have been historically underrepresented or subject to discrimination on the basis of identity or disability.
Yeah.
So you might also see terms such as like belonging, justice, and accessibility. So like while DEI I think is the most prevalent that people really latched onto, you might also see like inclusion and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is Jedi, which I think is kind of fun.
That's fun.
And then inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, which is IDEA. Because when we think of everyone, right, like yes, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but there was, kind of a shift as well to include people with disabilities for the accessibility aspect, because just as they're more as important as anyone else, right? Yeah. So diversity, looking it up, is, quote, the state of being diverse, variety. So then I said, let's go to the second definition. And the second is, quote, the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientation, etc.
Yeah.
End quote. So Google Books shows the word was most used in 2003 across texts, which I thought was interesting. Especially in 2003. But
the word diversity?
Yeah.
Huh.
And so I think it is cool. You can kind of see this range. And they do that for a lot of any word you look up.
Yeah.
But 2003 being its peak, but really kind of starting in like the 50s and 60s, right? You kind of have this trajectory upwards, whereas before it's pretty stagnant.
Yeah.
Right. So the presence of variety within the organizational workforce, such as in identity. So it includes gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, age, culture, class, religion, or opinion. So when we think of diversity as a whole, it's really just making sure that everyone is represented, right? That can be white.
Right.
It can be black, that can be gay, that can be, Muslim, that can be Jew, that can be all the things, right? So it's just really making sure that when you are in a situation that a pool of people can be diverse, which is kind of an umbrella, right?
Right.
So I think that's another thing is like the word within the context of like a business and a corporation and like a framework versus like the term in and of itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so like sometimes we do have to kind of place the context somewhere too. All right. So equity is, quote, the quality of being fair and impartial.
Okay.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
I didn't have to go to the second definition for that.
No.
So refers to concepts of fairness and justice in the workplace, such as fair compensation and substantive equality.
Yeah.
A focus on societal disparities and allocating resources and decision-making authority to groups that have historically been disadvantaged. So, quote, taking into consideration a person's unique circumstances, adjusting treatment accordingly so the end result is equal, end quote. So I think this is where some people start to get a little mixed up.
Yeah.
Right? I think people are like, well, why are we focusing to make sure that we're allocating the right things to other people, but you're not allocating those things to me? And then it's like, well, yeah, but if you're weighing down the scale, right, and we want to make it even, we want to make everyone equal, we need to pull some things over to the other side of the scale, right?
Yeah. I think one of my favorite's a strong word here. There is I think it's a cartoon of sorts, kind of explaining equity in a sense where it's like three people standing by a fence trying to watch a baseball game. Mm-hmm. And like equity is where like everyone gets like a certain amount of boxes to stand so they can all see over the fence at the same line, while like there's certain different like phrases where it's like, oh, like this will only provide you with the boxes to stand over the fence to see the baseball game.
Right.
And it's just like that kind of like, this is what we mean when we say equity is like, you might get one box and someone gets 3 boxes to stand on,
right,
so that you can both watch the game equally.
Right. Like equality is everyone gets 1 box.
Right.
But that doesn't mean everyone's able to see over the fence.
Yes.
Equity is ensuring that everyone can see over the fence, which means there just might be a different allocation of those resources to make sure that can happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think you could picture the same.
I got you. Yeah. I know exactly what cartoon you're talking about, or illustration. And so that's, I think, a really big crux in the issue is that, especially for white people, especially for, people who have really been able to take advantage of a system, right? Whether intentionally or unintentionally, feel like things are being taken away from them, right? And it's like, I'm not taking anything away from you. You're just experiencing the result of equality, right? Like you have vocalized, I'm in support of everyone should be the same and all the things that you've talked about, right? Well, in order for that to happen, I have to help the people get there, right? Like, and it's just, they feel like something's being taken away from them and they don't like that, right? And I'm just like, nothing's being taken away from you.
Right.
Other people are just being helped to get to your stature, right? Or people think that it's not involved, like white people aren't involved in DEI because it's all focused on minority groups, right? And it's like, well, rural populations, low income populations, like all of those things.
There are just different types of minority groups within the white population that are getting that help.
Right. And I don't mean to like harp on the white population. I just think that like,
well, they're the loudest complainer.
Well, exactly. I think it's just, I wanted to bring that into the fold, and we get down to that later, but I wanted to bring it into the fold because they are the loudest and it's the one that's the most controversial, right? In the sense of, we see minority populations understanding how good this is and allies within the white community, right? But then a really big part, and our government right now is saying that like it is unfair and quote unquote immoral to be able to do these things, to help those in need, right?
Empathy is a sin.
Have you heard? So that is equity. Yeah. And we'll continue to talk about this as we go through the episode.
This is going to be a long episode.
It's going to be a long episode, but I think really
a lot
good.
To yell about.
Truly. It is one of those things where it's just like watching everything happen is just, it is an education gap. You know what I mean? But it's one of those things where it's like, it's impressive to be able to manipulate a people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
While understanding that they're uneducated to a degree. And it's no fault of their own, but it's just like, that it's just crazy to watch and not be able to do something and then think, oh, right, I have some sort of a platform. I could maybe talk about it a little bit. So here we are.
Yeah.
So that's equity. Inclusion is, quote, the action or state of including or of being included within a group or structure.
Second definition, please.
And so we go to the second definition. Quote, the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as those who have physical or intellectual disabilities and members of other minority groups, end quote. Totally makes sense. Want to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to be included in a business, a structure, a workforce, etc. Right? So creating an organizational culture that creates an experience where, quote, all employees feel their voices will be heard, end quote, and a sense of belonging and integration, right? And that goes for conservatives, for liberals, for minorities, for everyone, right? Yeah. Like, it's just being able to create a situation where everyone is able to vocalize their experience so we can all learn from one another, right? Now, today, when you work with someone who just is on the other side of the tracks, it's just a little fucking frustrating. But, we get through it.
We get through it.
Because we believe in inclusion.
Right.
Sometimes I think we just need to get a little dirty, So while the concept of DEI found itself prominently in corporate structures and trainings. It has not only permeated other organizations such as academia, schools, and hospitals, but it has its roots in civil rights movements, right?
Naturally.
So now we're going to get into a little bit of the history. So that's like the definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion itself, right? And a little bit of how it pulls into some things. But now we're really going to get to the beginning of how it kind of transformed into what it is today, and really big mile markers in the U.S., right? I'll also say that. Like, this is not international. We're focusing on the United States itself. Yeah. So June 25th, 1941, Executive Order 8802 is signed by FDR, and this order is prohibiting discrimination based on race, creed, or national origin in defense industries. So it is one of the earliest federal diversity policies, and it was signed to prevent employment discrimination by private employers with government contracts.
Yeah, because you said this was FDR.
Mm-hmm.
Was this for war-related stuff?
Yeah. So it was signed in the eve of World War II to ensure that there would be no disruption to the production of military supplies.
That makes sense.
Right?
Yeah.
It also established the Fair Employment Practices Committee, which investigates complaint of discrimination. So it's one of those things where it's even like when you look at the Emancipation Proclamation, right? Like, it's one of those things where the reason why it happened, unfortunately, was not altruistic, but it at least happened, right? So, like, here, FDR wasn't like, everyone needs to be equal, so I'm signing this executive order. Of course, that's my driver. He's like, we're going into a war. We're going to need to make sure production is producing, and we can't have protests and, all of and strikes and all these things happening. Like, can't do it.
We're sending a lot of men overseas. We're still going to need people here to build shit.
Exactly. So that is kind of, like I said, one of the first big things within government to really talk about kind of anti-discrimination policies. Right.
Sure.
So 1954, we have Brown versus the Board of Education.
Right.
So U.S. Supreme Court ends legal segregation in schools, laying the foundation for racial integration and equal educational opportunities. So, as a reminder for everyone, or if you don't know for some reason, which would be wild.
I remember being taught this in school. Yeah. I don't know if it's still taught in school.
Oh, God. You won't learn about Tuskegee Airmen, apparently. So, argued by Thurgood Marshall. Yeah. Remember, for the NAACP, which was a future Supreme Court justice, y'all. Racial segregation in public schools is unconstitutional as it is unequal and violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
Right.
This was a unanimous decision that overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, which stated, quote, separate but equal.
Right.
End quote. That lovely coined phrase. So that was 1954. March 6, 1961. A lot of these are also executive orders, just so we know. Executive Order 10925, JFK signs the order requiring government contractors to take proactive steps towards workplace diversity. This executive order coins the term, quote, affirmative action. And that gets messy. And it gets messy quick.
Yeah.
Because what people took that as is that you are giving preferential treatment to minority groups over others, whether it's anti-discrimination or not, right?
Yeah, I remember hearing, not that I was alive in the 60s.
I was like, how old is he?
But no, like even like some people using the term affirmative action almost in like an insulting way.
Yeah.
Against other programs, against other people. I remember being like, just affirmative action. This person got hired over, or this person got promoted over, blah, blah, blah.
Well, and
kind of situation.
DEI is like the next generation's affirmative action, right? Like it literally has its roots in affirmative action. But I want to actually read the quote from the executive order because it says, quote, take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and that employees are treated during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin, end quote. So it's basically just saying, make sure that everyone's treated equally. Right. Make sure that when you are hiring, when you are employing people, when they are in your workplace, that you are taking action to ensure that everyone is equal, that there's no discrimination happening, right? But it just all of a sudden became, I used to have so much ease being able to get a job, being able to do XYZ because I was a white person.
Right.
And now they're like, well, I got to hold you up against other standards.
Yeah.
Right. So again, it's not a preferential treatment. It's just a matter of saying everyone's in the same fucking pool now.
Yeah. And I think I want to like toss in a little bit here as well. I think it wasn't like just like because I'm a white person. I think it was specifically because I'm a white man, because I know women at the time still are going through a lot of similar issues of like getting paid less, not being offered certain jobs, XYZ. Totally. You're supposed to be a secretary or a homemaker kind of situation.
Totally.
But now that they were entering the workforce, especially post World War II, whatnot, things were happening for them as well.
Yes. No. Great call out, because that's the most vital group, you know what I mean? And tends to be the loudest group, men. Yeah. So, especially when they're quote unquote wronged. So,
we're never wrong.
Have you heard? So that's the actual quote from the executive order and where the term affirmative action comes from, right?
Can you say again the year that was?
Yeah. That was, it was signed March 6, 1961.
1961. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to think of what war.
I honestly no. I mean, that would have been end of Korea.
Yeah, it was just Cold War stuff.
Yeah, we hadn't entered into Vietnam yet.
Yeah,
the Vietnam conflict. Thank you. Not a war. So this also establishes the PCEEO, which is the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity.
Okay.
So kind of the enforcer, right? So July 2nd, 1964, Civil Rights Act Title VII outlaws employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, prohibits unequal application of voter registration requirements, racial segregation in schools, and public accommodations, and employment discrimination, right? So it creates the EEOC, which we all kind of know.
The EEO form. That's what it is. Form? My dyslexia got me when I said EOE.
OE. Yeah.
Sorry.
That was great. And that, folks, is DEI.
Thank you. I should start writing out.
Right.
I do have a disability.
Yeah, exactly. We'll actually fill out forms. We'll post them publicly for transparency. So creates the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, to enforce workplace protections. Yeah. So that's the Civil Rights Act, right? And especially surrounding Title VII. So in 1965, the Voting Rights Act and Executive Order 11246 is signed by Lyndon B. Johnson.
Oh, LBJ.
If you will. So strengthens the concept of affirmative action by enforcing equal hiring practices in federal jobs and contractors. So it required federal contractors to create affirmative action programs. Mm-hmm. So it was amended by President Obama actually in 2014 to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity as well.
Okay.
Because previously it was just race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. So we kind of came in here and said, okay, disabilities, sexual orientation, like there's been some updates to that. The 91 gets more into, the update gets more into people with disabilities.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Obama in 2014, a lot of things were coming more into public focus.
Right.
People were actually acknowledging trans folks and gay folk and whatnot.
Well, and it's right before gay marriage is legalized in the U.S.
Oh, shit, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that was 2014. This was rescinded by Trump on January 21st, 2025, with his own executive order, quote, ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity, end quote.
Love it.
And so it's wild how you can spin something.
Yeah.
It is crazy. So that is Executive Order and the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act, I want to talk about that now. So the Voting Rights Act signed into law on August 6, 1965 as a, quote, act to enforce the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, end quote, by eliminating literacy tests and other barriers restricting black voter participation. So as a reminder, the 15th Amendment prohibits denial of voting rights based on race, color, or previous conditions of servitude, which was like, that's crazy. And it increased political representation for marginalized communities. So the Voting Rights Act, yes, allowed people of color, black men, to be able to vote, right? The 15th Amendment did that. But then, of course, people were like, how do we make it harder, right? And so then the Voting Rights Act was like, okay, you can't do any of this bullshit, right? So this really helped not only representation within the voting pool, right? And people actually getting to vote for the people that they want to see elected, but
Right.
also the representation of those groups within a government that is for them, built for them, right? By the people, for the people. Actually includes the people. Isn't that crazy?
Whoa.
Wow, it's
Get
wild.
out of here with
I
those
know.
crazy
Oh,
ideas.
sorry. Too progressive for 2025. That was 1965, by the way. I just have to remember what year we're in. So 1971, Coca-Cola becomes one of the first companies to establish a formal diversity program following a lawsuit over discriminatory hiring practices. So they're like, we're going to hire a chief diversity officer. But I was like, 71. Okay.
Is it because they got sued?
Correct.
So they had to. Okay. So it wasn't just like Coke doing it on their own.
Not altruistic.
Right.
Correct. So that year, though, they also had the Hilltop ad airs, and it was a diverse group of young people from all around the world singing on a hilltop in Italy.
Yes.
Singing, "I'd like to buy the world a Coke."
Yeah.
And that actually became super popular and like made its own recording.
That's one of the most famous advertisements out there.
Okay. Yeah, you get it. So I don't know why an Italian hilltop, but here we are.
Pretty.
It's pretty. It's fair. It's fair. I'll give it to you. So that was 1971. 1972, Title IX, expansion of gender equity. So Title IX of the Education Amendments Act bans sex-based discrimination in federally funded education programs. So it prohibits sex discrimination based on pregnancy, sexual orientation, and gender identity, prohibits exclusion from participation in educational programs, prohibits denial of benefits from educational programs, and prohibits subjection to discrimination in educational programs. It expanded women's access to athletics and academic opportunities, and it covers areas such as recruitment, admissions, counseling, financial assistance, sexual harassment, discipline, employment, etc. So 1972 is when we really go, oh, women are people, and they can, go into education and be educated appropriately.
Over 50% of our population,
right?
They're people.
Isn't that crazy? And so the expansion of gender equity, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this really, it situated itself, yes, within educational programs, but of course that then permeates out from there, because once you start somewhere, it's going to have the ripples, right? So obviously great for all women of color, creed, etc.
Yeah.
Right? And so people don't see a slippery slope when it's in front of them, but I hope that you start to see when you start to take away one piece of the brick, the wall starts to come down, right? So for white women out there who were like, rah, that's not going to happen to me, this could be a thing that, anyway.
The writing's on the wall.
We get it. So in 2024, Biden administration attempts to expand Title IX to include protections based on gender identity and sexual orientation. January 31st, 2025, Trump administration rescinds the attempt, and Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights Craig Traynor states, quote, "The Biden administration's failed attempt to rewrite Title IX was an unlawful abuse of regulatory power and an egregious slight to women and girls. Under the Trump administration, the Education Department will champion equal opportunity for all Americans, including women and girls, by protecting their right to safe and separate facilities and activities in schools, colleges, and universities," end quote. I would like to point out a couple of things here before you have an aneurysm.
Yeah.
Not supporting this. I'm just saying, as we really look at this statement, not only are we continuing to harp on women and girls.
Yeah, that's just
right?
so it's
weird to say that.
Yeah.
Champion equal opportunity for all Americans. Right? So trans people are not Americans. Trans people are not people, right?
Apparently.
They're not equal. No equal opportunity for them.
Right.
And by protecting their right to safe and separate, right? So equal, safe, separate facilities.
Separate but equal?
Maybe. I can't tell you. In schools, colleges, and universities.
Yeah.
So
What about our water fountains?
Those stay. So if you take anything from this today, if anything, just start to use a more critical eye and lens when you start to read things, when you start to hear things. Do a little bit of research. Don't just take things for face value. Actually read. These people who write these things are not talking out of their ass. These things are written and rewritten and gone through and talk. The semantics of these things matter because words matter.
Right.
And even though you might not be thinking about that, subconsciously your brain is going through that, right? So if I start to say safe and separate facilities over and over and over again, right? Or if I start to say illegal, what was it? Ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunities. How? Right? Discrimination against who?
Yeah.
Right. White people is what they're saying, right? So like just start to use that lens.
There's a lot of stuff left in between the lines, essentially.
Correct.
That you just kind of need to pick up on your own. Because I mean, especially, what'd you say, safe and separate? Like, if you just keep saying that over and over, you're going to think, oh, separate is now safe.
Right.
Like, I am making that connection. If I hear this over and over, that's how indoctrination happens.
Right.
And that's where you get fucked.
Well, correct. And if I am kept separate
Right.
from minority groups,
The others,
I am kept separate from all of the others, to your point, like, I am then safe.
Yeah.
Right? So then how much easier is it to convince a population after I've heard safe and separate, to then say these people need to be put here.
Right.
You need to be moved here.
Into a concentration camp.
Correct. So words really do matter, people. Going back to women and girls, quote, that's a quote. Sex will be reverted and defined as, quote, the objective, immutable characteristics of being born male or female, end quote. And I would like to remind the people that 5.6 million people in the United States are intersex. So I don't know where those people fall because they're not necessarily trans.
They're not American citizens,
right.
Then.
So have you heard? Obviously. So this will also affect how sexual assaults are investigated on campuses.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting. And to that point, too, like, while birthright citizenship is fully constitutional, so that won't go anywhere, at least I hope that wouldn't go anywhere, this is where that starts to happen, right? So, like, it is un-American to be, like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. There's so many ways to start to manipulate the system, and it might be us just being like, I could see that happen, and it might not happen, right? Like, but there is possibilities when you start to see some of the traction in which these things are going.
Well, there's already laws in Tennessee that if you are a sworn person of office going against anything that Trump says, you can be prosecuted for it.
Oh, yeah.
So like that, here we are.
I almost did this episode on Hitler's rise to power. And then I was like, that needs some more attention. So we might get that later.
We have to tread carefully on that because we might attract the wrong audience. Maybe we'll radicalize a few.
Or maybe every 10 minutes just put on the screen, we do not support Nazism. Okay, so that is the 1972 Title IX expansion on gender equity. Okay, all of that sits underneath that, especially with more recent things. So 1978, Regents of University of California v. Bakke. So the Supreme Court rules race can be a factor in college admissions, but bans racial quotas, reshaping affirmative action policies. So the court ruled that quotas violate equal protection by treating applicants differently based on race and could lead to reverse discrimination by unfairly excluding qualified applications, which does make sense, right? If I'm like, I have to have 5 black people, 3 Asian people, you know what I mean? Like, it starts to get to a point where you're like, okay, well, I can't take any more applications for people who are white.
Right.
So I do agree. You know what I mean? I do think that it does make sense on that. But it did reshape where affirmative action started, because I think there are a lot of people in this world that if you don't give them specific direction, it is very difficult for them to understand how to take something, right? So if I hear affirmative action and I need to make sure that all of these people are represented, I'm going to kind of say, well, we need a metric then to make sure that everyone's represented, right? So now I've kind of inadvertently or, consciously made a quota system, right? And that's kind of where that preferential treatment comes in, right?
Yeah, well, because it's tough because the human brain loves to compartmentalize. They love to put things in categories, and everything has a nice, neat little spot where everyone and everything goes, so we could process this massive amount of data in this little squishy computer that we have swimming around in our skull is able to just process all of this information. And so like that's, I see like the natural state of like, I need this metric just so we can make sure things run smoothly.
Yep.
But kind of backfires.
Unfortunately,
we're just squishy little computers.
Squishy. Oh, I'm just like thinking about typing on like a squishy like keyboard, and that feels so awkward.
It just squelches with each key.
No, I don't like it's like wet, gross. Okay, so that's 1978.
Yeah.
1987. We're gonna jump a little bit. The Workforce 2000 report comes out. So the Hudson Institute predicts the increasing diversity of the U.S. workforce, prompting businesses to invest in DEI training and corporate diversity initiatives. So basically, this report said in the 2000s and moving forward, diversity will be huge.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to want it. People are going to be a part of it. It's a whole thing.
It'll be so hot.
It's going to be the hot new thing, right? So then people were like, oh, we have to get ahead of that, right? So that really shifted things in 87, okay? 1990 hits, and we have the Americans with Disability Act, which is the ADA. Mm-hmm. So expands DEI to include disability rights requiring accessibility in workplaces and public spaces. It was signed by George H. Bush on July 26, 1990. It protects employees and job seekers with disabilities from discrimination and requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations for qualified employees and applicants. Mm-hmm. It ensures accessibility in transportation, buildings, telecommunication, website apps, and more, right? So there's so many ADA like listings and requirements now for building codes, for websites, for, so many people are taking, look at Apple. Apple has an entire department dedicated to accessibility just for all of their technology.
Oh,
you know what I mean? Like I can use my Apple Watch and just like tap my fingers to be able to move things on my watch and screen because it picks up on motions instead of like if I don't have a hand or if I don't have the ability to utilize my other, like I can still use an Apple Watch.
That's
like,
crazy.
It is insane,
That's cool.
Right? Or like telecommunication of like TTYP, you know what I mean? Things like that was huge. Yeah. Huge for people with disabilities because, going back 30 years, 20 years, you just kind of shove people with disabilities into a home and said, okay, we'll see what happens.
Now we have a ramp to your doctor's office. Yeah. ADA compliant.
Woo! We'll take it. So 1991, the Civil Rights Act amendments happened. So this enhances penalties for workplace discrimination, more rights to plaintiffs, and encourages corporate diversity programs.
Sure.
1995, Adarand versus Pena. So the Supreme Court imposes a standard of, quote, strict scrutiny on race-based government programs, leading to a decline in affirmative action policies. So strict scrutiny holds that the challenged law as presumptively invalid unless the government can demonstrate that the law or regulation is necessary to achieve a compelling state interest. So the government must also demonstrate that the law is narrowly tailored to achieve that compelling purpose and that it uses the, quote, least restrictive means to achieve that purpose. Mm-hmm. So basically, a law is invalid unless you can provide why it is necessary. Like it has to have a compelling reason for why we are enacting this law. If it's under strict scrutiny, why are we enacting this law? And when we do that it's narrowly tailored, that it can't just be broad strokes of things, right? And it has the least restrictive means to achieve that purpose. Okay. So basically, the Supreme Court took that concept of strict scrutiny and put it on the standard of kind of affirmative action and race-based programs to make sure that like everyone, again, is included, that we're not preferential treatment, like all of the things, right?
Yeah.
So failure to meet the standard will result in striking the law as unconstitutional.
Okay.
So that's kind of what came out of that case.
Sure.
Was kind of applying this kind of really kind of intense view and like regulatory aspect or review, sorry, is what I meant to say, of these race-based government programs of like affirmative action, right? So that's 1995. 1996, Prop 209 comes out. Mm-hmm. California becomes the first state to ban affirmative action in public employment and education. So it prohibits state and local government from considering race, sex, or ethnicity when making decisions about public employment, contracting, and education. This triggers a wave of similar bans in other states. This also makes it more difficult for local governments to implement programs that promote diversity and inclusion.
I'm surprised it came out of California first.
I know, but it's like California in the 90s, maybe?
Yeah, California in the 90s is weird.
It was 80s, 90s? Yeah. So, I think it's interesting because they banned the affirmative action policy because it's what we hear today, right? Like, and I think the New Yorker did it. I remember who did the sketch, but it was like we're colorblind right? Like all of those things. And then it was like a box of crayons and all the crayons were white. And I thought that was really funny. They all said white on them. And so that's kind of this thing, right? Like this ban is like, no, we don't consider anything because everyone's equal in our, like all of those things. It's not realistic.
Right.
And I get into some quotes about another case later on that I think is really telling because while I understand what you're saying in the sense of I'm colorblind because I want everyone to be equal and I want to like judge everyone on the same scales and all of the things. And that's fine. You can do that. But you still have to take people's experiences and like backgrounds into consideration, right? Like when I'm hiring someone, I take their experience into consideration. It's the same thing for anything else, right? Anyway, so that's Prop 209. And that kind of spurred throughout the other states as well. So 2003, Grutter v. Bollinger. So Barbara Grutter claims that she was discriminated against when she was denied admission to the University of Michigan's law school because she is white. She's a white applicant, and the school's admissions process gives advantage to minority applicants.
Okay.
The Supreme Court rules for the University of Michigan and upholds affirmative action and reinforces that race-conscious admissions are legal, ensuring the continuation of diversity initiatives in higher education.
Okay.
The University of Michigan admissions process was narrowly tailored to achieve diversity, and it did not violate the 14th Amendment, right? Because previously, in 95, we said race programs are now going to be under strict scrutiny, right?
Right.
So they had to prove that the admissions process was narrowly tailored to achieve diversity, but it didn't violate any sort of equal protection clauses of things.
Sure.
Right? So Barbara Grutter, get fucked. So Supreme Court ruled to that. And I think it's crazy. Like that's 2003, right?
Yeah.
And we're saying this is still great. And then all of a sudden 20 years later, we're at a spot where we're like, absolutely, we would never do, you know what I mean? Like it's insane.
Yeah.
That's 2003. 2010, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Repeal Act. So Don't Ask, Don't Tell is repealed, allowing LGBTQ plus individuals to serve openly in the military. It does not ban discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation in the military, though. So Military Readiness Enhancement Act was proposed between 2005 and 2009 to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation, but it was stalled out and never passed. So you can still discriminate in the military against people of the LGBTQ plus group. I don't know. I can't think what I call
community.
Yeah, there it is. Thank you. I was like, what are we again? But they can be open in the military.
Right.
So it's a win and also weird. It's both. In 2014, we have diversity reports. So tech companies like Google, Facebook, and Apple begin publicly reporting workforce diversity data, setting a precedent for corporate DEI transparency. Right. So again, remember everything's kind of leading up to where we are now, but like you have these builds on like really promoting diversity and like the importance of it and all of those things. You still have some struggle, I think, within like policy, procedure, government programs, all of the things, but especially the corporate side of things is really taking diversity on.
Yeah.
Right. And now we're like, look at how diverse we are. Look at how attractive that is. You know what I mean? Like taking advantage almost of it, celebrating it, but also taking advantage of it.
It was said diversity was going to be huge. Here
Have
we
you
are.
heard? So I think about it like, similarly, like every June, corporations are like, look, gay pride. And like you're doing it for capitalist reasons, but I get you're a business. But that's kind of like what we're seeing here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So 2016 implicit bias study. So researchers at Harvard released a study on implicit bias that leads to widespread bias training in workplaces, police departments, and universities. 2018 was the Starbucks incident in Philadelphia, where everything like shifted for Starbucks and a lot of companies. You know what I mean? You know, two black men were in a Philadelphia Starbucks, weren't purchasing anything, were waiting for another business person to join them for their meeting, and were asked to leave because they weren't purchasing anything. It escalated. They refused to leave because they're waiting for someone, and they called the police. And then they got arrested, and it was a whole thing. Right?
Yeah.
And it was wild because we both worked for Starbucks in 2018.
Yeah, I think I was still working. Or no, I stopped in 17.
Oh, really?
I think so. Yeah.
I was running a store. That was crazy.
Yeah.
And the high incident store too. And I was like, oh. So
no, I was actually. I'm sorry. I remember the extra training we got.
Yeah. Where all the stores closed for the day, and we did the whole thing. And I worked with a group in the SSC to build an unconscious bias training. Yeah. It was cool. It was crazy, but it was cool. So that happens, and that starts to permeate, of course, across the corporate sector, right? And into, I had to take an unconscious bias training for the company we just entered into.
Yeah.
And so it's still present and permeant. And I think that's great. So in 2018, we have the Me Too movement. So corporations in the U.S. strengthen sexual harassment policies and gender equity programs following high-profile allegations, right? 2020, we have George Floyd. After the murder of George Floyd and subsequent protests, major companies pledged billions towards racial equity and expand DEI initiatives. I want to remember, one, yes, of course, how awful that was, but how powerful your voice can be and how that can change things when you're met with oppression and you're met with discrimination and racism and all of those things.
Yeah.
Like, just remember what we've been able to achieve and how that is still possible.
Right. I mean, like even back in the 60s, 70s, when we were going through all of those executive orders and acts and whatnot that you mentioned, there were still a lot of protests going on.
Totally.
For various different things, rights, conflicts, etc. But like there were still a lot of vocalization of the people being upset about what's going on in the country.
Right. And I think like the 60s tends to be like, I think is the civil rights movement era, right?
Yeah,
of course. But it tends to kind of, because it happened so long ago, so to speak, there's kind of like a distance that we have from like, oh, well, that was the 60s. Right. That was like just to be equal in general, right? And have rights.
Yeah.
But this is so different. But I just want everyone to remember 2020, 5 years ago, you know what I mean? We were able to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And we can do that again.
Right. The 60s were only 60 years ago. Like that's a lifetime. Like that's my parents' lifetime,
right.
You know? Like, like they're into their 60s, approaching 70s. Sorry, Gail.
She's gonna be like,
you're like, don't say that.
Right. I'm gonna watch this and be like, beep.
Yeah. But like it's just a lifetime, generation ago. So like this is what's happening within our generation, within our lifetime, and it's something like you mentioned that we've spoken loudly before. It can happen again.
Right. I think it's a consistent reminder to learn from history.
Yeah.
Because we, for some reason, have forgot how to do that.
It's a cyclical bitch. I've said it before.
Have you heard? So additionally, in 2020, NFL's Rooney Rule, expands to require diverse candidates for executive and coordinator positions within the NFL. Little sports reference.
Wild that it took so long, especially since like, I don't know, the NFL is predominantly played by people of color.
Right.
The fans are diverse, but like, geez.
Yeah, but it's one thing for them to play. It's another thing to have control. Come on, Devin.
Points of power. Yeah, that's
Keep
true.
up with it. So, also in January 20th, 2021, we have Executive Order 13895, which is advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. So it directs federal agencies to identify and address barriers that prevent underserved communities from accessing opportunities and benefits. It requires agencies to address systemic racism in federal policies and programs. So I think that's amazing because it really forces the government to look at not only underserved communities, but also, of course, systemic racism, right?
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is like, I remember in 2023, we were tasked for my job to help people find health coverage through healthcare.gov to focus and start a rural pilot program because we saw the rural community as an underserved community, right? And the rural communities are predominantly white. And so that was a big initiative by the Biden administration, was to create presence and to create kind of an awareness around rural communities that needed also health support.
Yeah,
right.
I think that's one of the bigger things that I hear from rural voices is like, oh, like the government doesn't care about us. Like we provide the whole country with food. Why aren't we being seen?
Right.
And like that. And then that's where kind of like the racism comes into play, where it's like, oh, they only care about the people of color in the big city kind of situation. They only care about the urban people.
Right. And so it's going to be crazy when 40% of the migrant workforce is deported. And then our entire food system shuts down. So that was 2021.
Start your community gardens, folks.
Right. Your victory gardens.
Yeah. Your victory gardens.
If you will. We're going to bring it back. World War II all over again. So, unfortunately, though, we're not on the right side. So, June 29th, 2023, SFFA, versus Harvard and UNC. So, and I say that in parentheses because they are two cases that get looped together when they get to the Supreme Court, but then they kind of get split again because one of the justices, Justice Brown has to step because she went to Harvard. So she was like, I have to step out of that, right? So this is kind of a little bit more, this is a bigger case that I focus on. So in 2013, it was alleged that Harvard's undergraduate admission practices violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by discriminating against Asian Americans. In 2019, a district court judge upheld Harvard's limited use of race as a factor in admissions, citing lack of evidence for, quote, discriminatory animus or conscious prejudice.
Okay.
So they were like, no, it's, again, narrow focus, like, it's fine. 2020, the U.S. Court of Appeals affirms the district court's ruling. So like, nope, that's right, everything's good.
Okay.
Harvard's fine.
Yeah.
2023, the U.S. Supreme Court takes on the case and overturns the lower court's rulings and 45 years of legal precedent because our Supreme Court is fucked up. So the court held that race-conscious affirmative action, that is, the consideration of an applicant's race as one factor in making an admission decision, particularly to realize the educational benefits of diversity, is unconstitutional.
Okay.
Forcing universities to revise DEI strategies. This was a 6-2/6-3 ruling, right? 6-2 because that was the Harvard case, and then UNC was 6-3. So regardless, it was split on party lines. So Justice Roberts wrote that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment applies, quote, without regard to any difference of race, of color, or of nationality. Eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. For the guarantee of equal protection cannot mean one thing when applied to one individual and something else when applied to a person of another color, end quote. He states that affirmative action programs, quote, lack sufficiently focused and measurable objectives, warranting the use of race, unavoidably employ race in a negative manner, involve racial stereotyping, and lack meaningful endpoints. We have never permitted admissions programs to work in that way, and we will not do so today, end quote. I think it's interesting because Justice Roberts like, okay, everyone's equal. You can't like blah, 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 right? And it's going to have a negative effect when you employ race, right? 45 years of legal precedent was it's fine to be able to promote diversity so long as you do that narrowly. Like Harvard followed all the rules, right? All everything that was, put in place by previous Supreme Courts. And he was like, no, they were wrong. You can't even do that for diversity reasons or narrowly focus or even allow it to be one, point on the admissions scale to see what that looks like, right? Nope, can't do it. Sorry. And so lastly, I think what's crazy, so that's just Justice Thomas, white man. Or I'm sorry, Justice Roberts. Justice Thomas, who is a black man, states, quote, while I am painfully aware of the social and economic ravages which have befallen my race and all who suffer discrimination, I hold out enduring hope that this country will live up to its principles so clearly enunciated in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, that all men are created equal, all equal citizens, and must be treated equally before the law, end quote. Like, how fucking oblivious. Like,
so did he release that quote from his new yacht that he was gifted?
Exactly. I'm just like, what are you talking? Like, oh, I know what it is to feel the discrimination as being a black person. I totally understand all of the things. Yeah, but our country will rise above that, and we don't need to be held to these sort of like resources and allocations of fuck yourself.
We're so much better than where we were 60 odd years ago.
Right.
Like we'll be fine. We've learned our lesson. We don't need these rules.
It's like you're just so, and the thing is that he's not ignorant toward it, right? But he's benefiting off of the aspect of saying that, right? He's fully just benefiting and reaping the benefit of that and turning against his own community in that, right? I just think it's insane. And he didn't have to write anything, but he chose to go out and write that.
His vote spoke loud enough.
Right. You didn't have to do,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, so Justice Sotomayor for the dissent states, quote, ignoring race will not equalize a society that is racially unequal. What was true in the 1860s and again in 1954 is true today. Equality requires acknowledgement of inequality, end quote. I was like, 1,000%.
Yeah.
Like, anyway. And then Justice Jackson writes, quote, with let them eat cake obliviousness. Today, the majority pulls the ripcord and announces colorblindness for all by legal fiat. But deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life. It would be deeply unfortunate if the Equal Protection Clause actually demanded this perverse, ahistorical, and counterproductive outcome. To impose this result in that clause's name when it requires no such thing, and to thereby obstruct our collective progress towards the full realization of the clause's promise is truly a tragedy for all of us. Right? The Constitution and the Equal Protection Clause are goals. Right?
Yeah.
We want everyone to be equal. We want everyone to be on the same level. We want all of those things.
Right.
What we're doing to get to that point is DEI, is affirmative action. I totally understand when some of those outliers and fringe aspects can happen where it does get a little preferential or it does become quotas. It does do all those things, right? But you can't just all of a sudden decide everyone's equal.
Right. That's not how that works.
That's not how that works. Right. We're building the stepping stones and we're building the framework to get to that point.
Yeah.
You don't get to all of a you don't like to all of a sudden say all the American people are equal. That's it.
Right.
That's just not possible.
Is that community getting the same education as this community on the other side of the tracks?
Right.
No.
Right.
Then you're not equal.
So state level bans on DEI. So with this, I mean, this ruling changed everything.
Yeah.
Right. So with this ruling, several states, such as Texas and Florida, naturally, cut funding for DEI programs in universities, right? So the minute that they said, you no longer have to participate by affirmative action because it is unconstitutional, which then in turn means DEI, right. That means I don't have to fund it. I don't have to talk about it. I can actually, it was stated as being illegal.
Yeah.
So now I can attack it. Because it's an illegal practice happening in the U.S.
Yeah. I don't have to teach anything about race stuff.
Right. I'm not doing any of that.
Yeah.
Right. That changed everything. So this then leads to debates about DEI's role in education and, of course, business. Mm-hmm. Should this be applicable in hiring practices as it is now in admissions framework? Because in admissions, if I cannot consider race or anything to be a factor, that means should I also make sure that that happens in hiring practices?
Right.
Right. So all of a sudden, everyone's kind of moving around trying to say, how do I keep diversity programs, but also I can cut them now, but I can do all these things, right? So in 2024, we have a name change. So many companies reframe DEI as inclusive leadership and belonging initiatives to maintain efforts while avoiding political backlash. So this still gives them the win, right? So like you might still be implementing the practices, but you're like, we'll change it, just like let it skate by. And you're like,
right.
That's not doing anything for anyone. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like eventually it'll catch on, right? So it's kind of insane. So that was kind of, I know we talked a little bit about 2025 and throughout, but that was kind of the last big thing. So that's all of the history.
Yeah.
So have a little snickety snack. Go get some water. There's not too much like in the sense of notes, but we do start getting into like some like sectors, and I'm just going to run through like kind of like how these improvements helped these sectors and these people.
Sure.
All right. So sector applications is what I've titled this. We're going to start with workplace and economic programs. So it increased, DEI increased access to jobs and advancement.
Sure.
Right. Its efforts have helped level the playing field for historically marginalized groups, leading to more diverse leadership and workforce representation. Latino labor participated is now 66%, higher than the national average of 62%, reflecting expanded opportunities.
Okay.
Programs like the Veterans Employment and Training Service, VETS, and federal hiring preferences have helped reduce veteran unemployment to 3.5%, which is lower than the national average. Higher innovation and productivity. So companies with strong DEI policies have seen increased creativity and problem solving due to diverse perspectives.
Yeah.
Community development. DEI initiatives have supported minority-owned businesses, resulting in stronger local economies and job creation. The Small Business Administration program has a 8A program has helped increase Latino-owned businesses by 35% since 2010. DEI programs have supported a 50% increase in Asian-owned businesses since 2000, contributing significantly to the U.S. economy.
Yeah.
And also, everyone, the better the U.S. economy does, the more jobs that are accessible to you, regardless of who you are. So if you start like, nah, everyone's taking my jobs, the better the economy does, the better these practices have,
right,
the more jobs that are open for you to be able to take. So equal employment opportunity laws also occurred. So it opens the door for millions of workers as workplace discrimination based on race, gender, religion, or national origin is illegal. Supplier diversity programs. So large corporations, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, and government agencies prioritize contracts with minority and women-owned businesses, helping to build wealth in historically underserved communities. Pay transparency and pay equity initiatives. So companies like Salesforce have audited and adjusted salaries to address pay gaps, leading to greater financial equity. So since the passage of the Equal Pay Act in 1963 and ongoing DEI efforts, the gender wage gap has narrowed from 60 cents to 82 cents per dollar earned by men, which was a report coming out of Pew Research in 2023. Which I think is crazy that we can't just get to a fucking equal dollar.
Yeah,
like, I wrote that and I was like, 60 to 82 cents is a pretty good improvement. And I was just like, but like, you can't just get to a fucking equal, right, like, just pay them the same.
Right. I don't know why that's still...
I don't know why that's so hard. Anyway, so that was 2023, by the way, too.
So it's only going to get worse. You're going to go back to 60%.
Yeah. Probably less.
Yeah.
You might even, you can't have credit cards anymore. Surprise. Blessed be the fruit, you know? So companies with diverse leadership are more profitable. A 2020 McKinsey study found that companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity were 36% more likely to outperform their peers in profitability. Like, if all at the end of the day, all this is about money and control and all those things, let's look at the actual performance then of these diversity practices and how they've helped businesses grow,
right, and
helped the economy grow. Like,
well, I mean, it's a known fact, no matter like who you are, well, it doesn't matter where you're from, but it's like, if you had to work for where you are, then you're going to continue to work harder, right, than if you were just handed something, right, you know?
Yeah, totally. So gender diverse teams were 25% more likely to outperform less diverse teams, and women now hold 10% of Fortune 500 CEO positions, up from 0% in 1995, due to corporate DEI programs, which I think is crazy. I mean, it sucks it's only 10%, but you know what? We'll take, 0 to 10, you know?
Yeah.
Diverse workplaces improve employee satisfaction and retention. So a 2023 Gallup poll showed that employees who feel included are 50% more engaged and 40% less likely to leave their jobs. And a 2021 Glassdoor found that 76% of job seekers consider diversity important when evaluating job offers. Now, they didn't say how important, but important nonetheless. Supplier diversity programs drive revenue growth. So 2019 Harvard Business Review found that companies with supplier diversity programs saw a 33% higher revenue per employee. Since 2020, there has been a 30% increase in Black-owned businesses. And the Minority Business Development Agency reports that the minority-owned businesses contribute $1.4 trillion to the U.S. economy annually and employ over 8 million people.
Wow.
A DEI program, by the way.
Yeah.
Just in case anyone forgot. So within education and academic advancement, so better educational access, of course, right? Programs like affirmative action before its rollback helped increase enrollment of underrepresented students in higher education.
Yeah.
So TRIO programs, actually federal programs providing academic support to low-income first-generation college students, helping them access higher education. That has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with creed. That has nothing to do with sex. That's just low-income first-generation college students.
Yeah.
Like, okay. The post-9/11 GI Bill has allowed 2.2 million veterans to attend college tuition for free. The Biden administration reaffirmed that Title IX protects LGBTQ plus students from discrimination in education. Again, this permeates beyond. I hope we all see that. It permeates beyond race. So anyway, HBCU and minority serving institution funding. So it increased federal and corporate investment in historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and Hispanic serving institutions, HSIs, and expanded educational opportunities, right? Culturally inclusive curriculum policies. So school incorporating diverse perspectives help foster understanding and reduce bias, leading to more inclusive learning environments. Some states, like California, have implemented ethnic studies requirements in public schools, improving cultural representation in education. So California, New Jersey, and Illinois have all passed laws requiring history and social studies curriculums to also include LGBTQ plus contributions, fostering a more inclusive school environment, right? That's the thing. If you teach it in schools, people will then learn and incorporate that into their beliefs and ideologies, etc., and then implement that in the world. So if I can cut that at the education level and at the school level, then my policies can then prosper because nobody learns. Correct.
Well, that's the thing too, is like everyone, people are so like, oh, like when you go to college, you become a liberal. It's like, no, you're just exposed to the other people outside of your small ass town. Like you're seeing people you're seeing other people's shoes, walking in them a little bit. Right.
Like I hate sometimes the, college educated whites versus non-college educated whites, especially within like a voting perspective and like those polls. Like I hate that because not everyone can afford college, right? And not everyone can attend. There are a variety of reasons. So I do hate that kind of comparison. However, what that tells me is that when you get to college and you critically think and you meet people from diverse backgrounds and experiences and all of those things, that actually shifts the way that you think, right? So if that can kind of permeate into the public education on like a high school level, like and lower, kind of like K through 12, then that could really change things. But if I can really keep people in that K through 12 and really limit the amount of information that they can learn, then I can really manipulate so much easier. Right? Crazy. So representation.
No, go ahead.
What'd you have?
No, it's just like information suppression is like the first step.
Right.
Into everything.
I do wonder if the Supreme Court will take up I think they did say they will. I don't remember. Oklahoma wants to create its first publicly funded Catholic school.
Oh, that's not.
So I will be interested to see what happens. I mean, nothing would be surprising anymore. So DEI programs increase graduation rates. So first generation college students in TRIO programs graduate 20% higher rates than those who don't participate. HBCU funding and affirmative action policies contributed to a 30% rise in Black college graduation rates since 2000. Representation in faculty improves student success, such as a Stanford 2021 study found that the Black and Latino students perform better and stay in STEM fields longer when they have professors who share their racial or ethnic background. Right? You can connect. Right? So healthcare and social services. So culturally competent care initiatives. So national standards for culturally and linguistically appropriate services help ensure healthcare providers address the diverse needs of patients. So like I have to follow class standards and make sure that I am competent and like somewhat aware of all of the diverse aspects of culturally and linguistically appropriate services. Right? And really make sure that we are able to provide the necessary support to help everyone. Right? So, and that means everything from language barriers to accessibility for people with disabilities, to being culturally sensitive, to even low literacy rates, which we do see a lot in rural populations, low income populations, right? So the CDC in 2022 found that hospitals implementing DEI focused health programs reduced maternal mortality among Black women by 40% in some states. LGBTQ plus affirming healthcare providers see 20% higher patient satisfaction rates and improved mental health outcomes. The ACA prohibited insurance companies from denying coverage based on gender identity or sexual orientation as well. As of 2023, 67% of major U.S. employers offer trans-inclusive healthcare coverage, including hormone therapy and gender-affirming surgeries, compared to just 9% in 2010. Medicaid expansion with the ACA, so benefited communities of color and low-income populations by increasing healthcare coverage, reduces health disparities. So states have expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, so a 16% decrease in racial health disparities for uninsured Black and Latino populations. The expansion also led to 6% decrease in infant mortality rates among marginalized groups, and the ending the HIV epidemic initiative, which started in 2019, has expanded access to HIV prevention medications such as PrEP, reducing new infections among the LGBTQ plus individuals. Medicaid expansion is wild because it's a state-based sort of thing, but like ACA has helped do that. But like Texas, for example, has not expanded Medicaid. They are the top uninsured state in the United States. And the amount of people that you meet that are like, I make $10,000 a year and I don't qualify for Medicaid, because I am not pregnant, I am not this, I am not that, all of these things, because you have to file, like, hit certain brackets.
Yeah.
Then we're like, okay, well, here's a healthcare plan. Like, okay, again, I make $10,000 a year.
Right.
I can't afford
that.
I can't afford that. Yeah. Right? Like, I have to get food on the table. I have to do this and this and this. But the state doesn't give, you know what I mean? Okay. That was my little... Okay. Mental health equity programs increase representation in mental health fields and workplace inclusivity efforts, and have reduced stigma and improved mental health organizations or resources. Right?
Yeah.
So, next is, I have two more, I promise. Law, civic engagement, and public safety. So, of course, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. There's also the number of women and people of color in Congress has steadily increased due to DEI-driven political engagement programs, with the 118th Congress, which was 2023-2024, being the most diverse in U.S. history. Stronger legal protections, of course, so civil rights laws, workplace protections, and anti-harassment policies have expanded rights and resources for marginalized communities. The criminal justice reform, so programs like Ban the Box, have improved employment access, which is basically prevents employers from asking about criminal history on job applications.
Yeah. So,
like, for formerly incarcerated individuals, like, entering, you know what I mean? Police and community engagement initiatives. I think this is interesting. Implementation of DEI-based policing reforms focused on de-escalation and community involvement led to a 50% drop in violent crime since 2023. Or 2013. That was in Camden, New Jersey.
Okay.
So Camden adopted implicit bias training and de-escalation policies, and they were able to actually, like, be involved within their community. And
crazy how that works.
Isn't that nuts?
Yeah.
So corporate and media representation. So greater representation in media and leadership. So more diverse storytelling, entertainment, politics, and media has helped shift societal norms and reduce stereotyping. Media is huge, people. Like, fucking look at, like, fucking Musk's, like, Nazi salute, right?
Yeah.
Across the world, everyone's like, that's a Sieg Heil. That is a Nazi salute. Yeah. And then here in the US, no one fucking has the bones to say, like, he's awkward. He has autism.
Except for that one lady on CNN.
She was awesome.
Yeah, that was
She was awesome. Do it on live TV. If it's just an awkward gesture, do it right now. And I hate that the moderator was like, everyone calm down. I'm like, no, make him do it.
Right.
If he's going to defend it, make him do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, crazy. So, but then they would probably be slapped with a lawsuit about harassment. Or
so fucking blah.
It's so done. So initiatives like the Academy's representation and inclusive standards have increased representation in film, while companies like Netflix have invested in diverse creators. It improves audience engagement. So films with diverse casts outperform less diverse ones by 20 to 25% at the box office. And of course, TV shows with inclusive representation have higher audience ratings and stronger viewership amongst Gen Z and millennials. Fortune 500 companies with LGBTQ plus protections outperform those by 15% in revenue growth. And of course, business resource groups and employee networks improve retention and inclusion. And those groups are Black, Latino, LGBTQ plus, women, veterans. I saw Starbucks just has now a experience group for those that are older in age as like an external resource group.
Sure.
And I'm like, that's great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then of course, gender inclusive policies. So some companies have introduced policies like gender neutral bathrooms, paid family leave for all genders, and pronoun inclusion practices, right? So I get that gender neutral bathrooms are controversial and pronoun inclusion practices are controversial. The former, I don't really understand because that happens all the time. It's a fucking porta potty. You know what I mean? So, but paid family leave for all genders, I think is incredible.
Yeah.
Right? Like so many people that I know that have had kids, to be able to benefit from equal amounts of time off is amazing.
Yeah.
So that's it. The last couple of things I have are mainly Bible quotes, because I think it's insane that we're calling DEI immoral.
Yeah.
And we're calling on a lot of like a Christian nation. And I think it's just wild. And I don't want to go I have like 8, so I'm not going to go through all of them. But I think it's insane to call yourself a Christian or under kind of this religious sect.
Yeah.
And say that diversity, helping others, like making people equal, all of these things is not within the framework of your religion, or it's immoral to do so. Like it's wild to me for that. Like Proverbs 31, 8-9, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute, speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and needy. right? Like, what are we talking about here? You know what I mean? Where's the one I like? Leviticus 19:15. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly, or judge thy neighbor as yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not just love your neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. Like, anyway. So we can do this all day, but like, I think that's the thing is that, so for DEI, I really hope, I know this was a long episode, but I really hope that you understand, like, of course, where its roots are, contextually, how we got to where we are today, but also I really hope that you start to see, like, how, and by you, I mean people, not you, I know you, but like, I really hope you start to see how you're able to manipulate and adjust an agenda to your own will. Like, removing DEI does nothing for the people in power, right? They will always have power. But what it does is it removes rights from you to be able to control you better, to be able to implement their plans faster and for what they want. You know what I mean? So like, it's just, I don't think people see that. I think people that are like in line with the Trump administration are really like, oh my God, like they're doing all of these things on immigration and like all of these things on tariffs and screw them and all that. But like not connecting the dots and like DEI, like I'm a white, man, or I'm a white woman and I've been discriminated against in the practice before because they wanted to hire these people. And it's like, it's okay, be a racist. You know what I mean? It's not okay, be a racist. Go for it. You know what I mean? But you're going to soon realize that the removal of these programs and the removal of these things will affect you.
Right. I like to think of it as like we're all standing on the same bridge. We're all standing on the same stone bridge. And by removing these certain programs, these acts, these laws, etc., we're approaching the keystone. And for those of you who don't know, the keystone, when you have the arch support of your bridge, is that big center stone at the top of the arch. And once you remove that, the rest of the bridge collapses. And we're getting to that point.
Correct. I just think it's early. There's a lot happening. I think that I have some faith that we're also in a position. Here's the thing. We're also in a position where, there's been a lot of correlation between what's happening today and what happened in, 1930s Germany. And I 100% agree and can make all the points. And again, set another episode for another time. But I think that was 67 million people. Yeah. Right. In Germany, in one small space, about a 12th the size of the US. Yeah. Right. We are 336 million people across an expansive country. Like, I think the ability to be able to implement something as despicable as what was implemented in Nazi Germany and some of the, influence of what we're seeing today, this very conservative, very controlling, very kind of a racist agenda, is going to be very hard to enact across a country.
Yeah. And I think it's definitely part to the fact that like we have state rights,
right?
Like there is the federal law, but then we also have state law. And thankfully I live in Illinois, which is something I probably wouldn't have said 20 years ago if I was an angry 80s businessman or whatever.
Sure.
Where I have a great governor, shout out to JB.
Yeah, dude.
Who's like, fuck you. We're not implementing this.
Right.
This is a state of freedom and equality. We will always have that here within our state. And like, there's that sense of checks and balances that still thankfully exist for now, where we're able to have that separation of power.
Correct.
And I think that the state line is where hopefully the line will be drawn against something greater of a fascist country forming.
Well, and we had this discussion about when Roe v. Wade was overturned, and Thomas wrote about going and going after like Oberfeld and like looking at gay marriage. My husband and I were like, okay, what does that look like? And there was kind of some heated moments because there's this view of, well, in Illinois you're fine, right? Like it's legal, it's fine, like blah blah blah. I go, yeah, but if I travel in the U.S., like I don't have any sort of legal right depending on the state I am. If I travel internationally, something happens federally.
Right.
I don't have any right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's so many things beyond that like I think states' rights are great because they can be like really safe places for people. But I also think that you have a Republican majority in all branches right now that is going to be really hard to permeate, and it's going to really call on moderates and other Republicans to stand up against it and not bend a knee. You know what I mean? So like that's where we're at. And I know that we're kind of just focused in on DEI right now, but that goes just so beyond. You know what I mean? This has moved the country so far, and now we're repealing so much in 2 weeks. You know what I mean? So like, again, it's let's talk about what DEI is and how amazing it's improved this country and the lives of so many people, regardless of who you are. You know what I mean? It's an opportunity for all of us to be at the same level, which everybody kind of wants. You know what I mean? For the most part.
Yeah.
But it goes way beyond that, and it's an opportunity to really see where we were, how we got to where we are today, and really the slope that we're on.
Yeah. I'm going to extend the episode a little bit here and ask you a tough question that you might not have an answer right away for. So I'll cut out the time you're thinking.
Sure.
It's kind of a very broad question. We've laid out all of these issues, well, not issues. We've laid out this whole situation that we're experiencing right now from executive orders. It's a question of like, what can we do? What can the listener do? Whether they are for these executive orders being passed or against. What is kind of the best best action that they can do? Whether they to fight against, I guess, this. And whether it be like, and you can expand on these, I'm not stealing these answers for you.
Sure.
It could be whether just like educating yourself or calling your congressman kind of situation. What would be an action for a listener to do here?
Totally. I think, a lot of things you listed, absolutely. I think education is really the biggest thing.
Yeah.
I really, truly believe that. I think not only do you learn things like, quote unquote, this sin of empathy. So fucking stupid.
Read the fucking Bible.
It's just so, it's so crazy. Anyway, so reading that was wild to me. So anyway, I do think that education is the most important. I understand how that can feel daunting, right? I do understand that, like, okay, well, there's so many perspectives. There's so many things out there. Like,
it can be uncomfortable.
What do I do? It can absolutely be uncomfortable. We saw the same thing, when everyone was kind of, the mirror was turned like in 2020, right? With all the protests and all of those things. But some of us did the work. Some of us didn't. Some of us thought that was, an attack on them, which is crazy because a black man died. Multiple black people died. So, but what I will say is education is the most important thing you can do.
Yeah.
Just trying to understand like other people and other cultures. You know what I mean? Just like getting to know their story.
Yeah.
Go back to some history books. Just watch a couple movies. They don't have to be documentaries. You know what I mean? Like go watch like whatever.
Remember the Titans?
Yikes. Blindside.
Yikes.
Yeah, exactly. So, what do you call it? I think educating is truly is the most important thing.
Yeah.
I think remember your, from a political side of things, remember the power behind your local governments.
Yeah.
And how much those can change. Because to your point, states' rights, but also the effect that you see in your own backyard.
Yeah.
So start to know who for Chicago, who your aldermen are. Start to know who your state representative is. Start to know who, like within the state Congress of Illinois, not the federal, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, then call on your federal,
representative.
Thank you, Christ. As well, it's so many terms in my head right now.
Yeah.
As well, you know what I mean? Like, I think it is uncomfortable to make a phone call and say, you'll see scripts out there, right? Like call them and say this. Once you do the first one, it's so much easier, right? Or write the email or do the things. And it might feel like, really, is my voice going to do anything? It will, because if you do it and you do it and you do it and 30,000 people call, that's going to say something. You know what I mean?
It's like these people want to keep their jobs and get re-voted.
Right, exactly. And so doing things like that, ACLU going and staying updated with what's going on, like as they start to take some of these executive orders to court, you know what I mean? Stay updated on the information that's happening. There are things that you will agree with. There are things that you won't agree with. And that's fine.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I think that we have grown up in a world where we've, fought for civil rights. You've either were part of that or you lived through all of that.
Yeah.
And now we're in a place where we're repealing all of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's absolutely insane. And so just education, staying up to date with what's happening, and really starting to understand, okay, how did what I learn and what's happening now correlate?
Yeah.
Right? Because that gap is the advantage gap that they're going to take, right? Yeah, you learned about all of this in school. You don't really remember it, but you learned about all of it in school, and you can't see the correlation to what's happening today because of propaganda, because of manipulation. And you might think, we're the US, we don't have propaganda. It happens all the time. How many times?
So much propaganda.
If you scroll through X, let's say, and you watch something and another video populates and like it comes up with Fox News, or it comes up with something on like positive for Trump or whatever like that, like whether you're for Trump or not, that is manipulation. That is like the fact that the Secret Service showed up at a Chicago public school for an 11-year-old who posted an anti-Trump like video is starting to look at censorship on social media platforms.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Gestapo vibes.
Right. Like Meta, like making you follow JD Vance and Donald Trump, like the minute that they went into office, that is manipulate. Like you have to start to understand it and don't make excuses for it. Just say that happened. Let me learn more about it. And then I can make my decision from there.
Right.
If you're like, I don't think I did anything wrong after I did all of I double checked it. I looked into different opinions. I think that's fine. Live with it.
Yeah.
But don't just say, well, this person said it, so I believe it.
Right.
I disagree with the Democratic Party all the time. You know what I mean?
It's
like,
healthy.
And it's healthy. And like, there's so many things that like, we need to revamp and we need to do all these things. And we need a fucking backbone and we need to like just get dirty and just do it. Like stop. We take everyone into consideration, which is amazing, but that seems to make us so like anything we do, of course, like just say fuck it sometimes.
Yeah.
So anyway, your question was, what can people do? So again, education is number one. I think really do start to understand your local politics. I think, and like just politics and civics in general, like how things work, right?
Yeah.
Like when he was like, oh, we're going to pay you through September if you're a federal employee and you want to quit now. He doesn't have, like, the executive branch doesn't have the legal authority to be able to do that. That has to go through Congress, right? The freezing on funding that already been allocated and approved by Congress, he does not have the federal authority, the executive branch does not have the federal authority to be able to do that. Like, read up on civics again. Do that education. Understand how the world works. Again, if you are someone who is wholeheartedly behind Trump and you want that implementation within this country, that's fine. Not fine, but that is what it is. That is your decision.
Yeah.
But if you are going to say that is what I want and that is what I want for this country, at least tell me that you did the research to understand other perspectives.
Sure.
Because then I don't like you. I think that you're horrifying, but I'll say at least they tried to understand.
Right. I'm not going to take away your right to think that way. I'm just going to disagree with you.
Correct.
Yeah.
And, you're an asshole. But
go away.
Still go away. But I think like that's the thing is that I really, really hope that people can do that. And I think like, maybe we can provide, I just think that really making sure that you're reviewing what you're learning, you're double checking the things that you see online.
Yeah.
Like just really educate yourself. And if you make a decision at the end of the day that is either pro or against the oligarchy and fascism and all the things that are happening in this country, at least you were able to see a perspective of opinions and then come up with your own versus just following someone else.
Gotcha.
And respect yourself in that, right?
Right.
So that's what I have.
Great. Thanks.
Was that helpful?
I mean,
hopefully
I didn't need it.
Fair enough. Well, thank you, everyone. I very much appreciate it. I know this is a long episode, but I think we had some really great discussions. I really hope that you're able to take some of the things that we talked about today and really implement them into your lives, into your friends and family. I think you having discussions and the uncomfortable conversations with your family and friends is the most important. That's how we make the most amount of change. Yes, doing these things on public platforms and to strangers is easy, right? Being able to go out in the world and say, oh, well, I speak in front of a little camera and put it online. Like that's easy. But going in front of your family, your aunt, your uncles, your friends, your neighbors, like all those people and saying, you're wrong. And here is why you're wrong.
Yeah.
Makes the biggest impact. And at the end of the day, you guys might disagree and you might hate each other and whatever, but at least you were able to say, I made an effort to make a change. And that is huge. It starts small and permeates out, because then you can make a fucking ripple from there.
Yeah.
Okay. But thank you, everyone. That's our episode. Woohoo! We'll keep, as we start to have more discussions around what's happening, we'll start to look at topics that maybe even integrate into what's happening in the world, so that we can help you start to understand different correlations to history, different correlations to other topics that you should be aware of, that we think that you should be aware of, to make your opinion at the end of the day. And so I appreciate you sticking around. I hope you learned something. I hope that you go out there and have the uncomfortable conversations. I hope that you help the people around you, and you love your neighbor as yourself. So thank you, Devin. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
And we'll see. We'll just, stay tuned and keep on keeping on. Fight the fight when we need to.
Hell yeah, brother.
Hell yeah, brother. All right, y'all. Well, to be able to listen to us, you can follow us on all social media platforms at @WDYK_podcast. We are also on Blue Sky, which is
WDYK.bsky.social.
Thank you. He's got it. I don't. So thank you. We'll catch you next time. And, just educate yourselves. And we will talk to you next week.
Okay,
bye, Dev.
Bye.